today we have a very, the great pleasure of having my friends who I actually, thanks to friendships that I have in Tucson, ever since 2010, when Connie and I moved back here, we would visit Tucson to visit Rabbi Yudi Zeitlin. And that's really where I got to know Jonathan Perry. He was then still on his journey of studying, wasn't a rabbi yet. And actually something that I take great inspiration from is his journey of studying obviously started way before I met him. But after he got married, had children, he continued his studies. And that's actually when he became ordained. So it wasn't like, me, where I didn't have a family that I was needing to support and I can devote all my time to this. He worked hard at this while he was working as well with his wife. And so there's a lot to be inspired about. And today we also have the great pleasure of having his mom join and listen in. And I asked if I can give a shout out to her. And he said, this is his greatest supporter. So I do want to give a shout out to his mom who's listening in today. And so thank you. And what I want to do is I just want to share a little bit. One of the things that I actually read, which was pretty cool, I did not know this, Jonathan, was that it was 19 years old when he really met Rabbi Shem Tov in Tucson as the Chabad rabbi there and the rabbi of the Young Israel, that he really began his, I'm going to say, more in-depth study, if I can use that. He had a question. And if I read this correctly, I was going through your Facebook post, so you'll, it said that the rabbi never answered his question. He got the answer on his own. So
right.
I would love for you to share a little bit about your upbringing, a little bit about yourself and what inspires you. And of course, it's all yours to share anything you'd like. And then I'm sure people will have questions. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And it was nice of you to reach out, but it was also nice to, we had a discussion beforehand. It was nice to sort of catch up and talk about things. And so I really appreciate it. And yeah, so 2010, that's wild. Yeah, I had just moved back to Tucson 2009. So I went off to yeshiva essentially when I came to, observance. It was, like he said, through Rabbi Shem Tov in Tucson, Arizona. There's a lot of factors involved that led me to Rabbi Shem Tov, but then after that, eventually I went off to yeshiva myself. And so I came back right before you did. I think Ephraim Zimmerman also came back, I think that next year, 2010, came to Arizona. He's in Tucson as well. So anyways, yeah, so thank you for having me. And I won't take up too much time with the story. I'll kind of get to the sort of the meat and potatoes of, or at least in my in my eyes, about the story, and even the particulars I can kind of skim through to get to exactly what it is that inspired me and continues to inspire me and led me to where I am. So I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and definitely go Wildcats. But so I grew up in Tucson, and it's, it was definitely interesting as a young African American boy growing up in Tucson, Arizona. Things are quite segregated in Tucson. However, when we moved to a particular pocket of Tucson where we moved to when I was like 5 or 6, there was they started building this community, in the suburbs, and essentially there was Raytheon out there. So there was more diversity that were, getting their first homes in this little pocket that we found. And so Baruch Hashem, it worked out that way. And, so I grew up with not a whole lot of, Jewish friends and Jewish community. We would go to, synagogue, and I had Hebrew school and Sunday school. And that was sort of where I got my, my Jewish upbringing. But the majority of the things that stuck with me and things that I remember most about my, my Judaism in my youth came from my mom. And essentially, when my mom married my father, her family, my father not Jewish, her family was less than excited. And so there was not such a, a big, I guess, influence there in terms of my time spent with that side of the family. Didn't really come till later, and there was maybe always a little tension. Maybe I noticed, I picked up from my father, but he was very close to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, towards the end of her life, thank God. So, eventually she came around and everyone came around, but I certainly, in my youth, I maybe felt a negative way about the fact that she chose to sort of not interact with us so much in the beginning of my life. But then the older I got, and I have my own family, Baruch Hashem, and as I became more focused on Judaism, and I developed an appreciation for her stance, for her situation, from where she was. This was, a danger to the Jewish people and the survival of the Jewish people. So I understood and I appreciated it, but thank God that during her life we were able to come together and get closer and everything like that. One thing though, when I was a kid, so growing up in America, there was a rule back when schools were segregated called the one drop rule, essentially, that if there was a hint of Black heritage in a child, then they would go to the Black schools in the Black, the Black area. And that very much kind of just seeped into the general, the way that the society works in America, at least with the Black community. My whole life, I was always like accepted by the Black community. Most of my friends were Black. Even my friends that weren't Black still considered me one of their Black friends, and that was me culturally. That was how I identified. So my whole life, my upbringing, really, the formidable years, I understood myself to be a Black man in America, a Black kid in America, and then a young Black man, and everything was kind of through that lens. And I didn't, as I said, I didn't grow up observant. So certain concepts like the neshama, the Jewish soul, these things I hadn't really learned, but I always told my mom that I felt Jewish inside, even though culturally I feel very much, I feel like a Black kid. So that was sort of always stuck with me. I always felt like I was gonna, learn something and get closer. And teenage years, you start to get more curious about meanings of life and things like that. And I would have many conversations with my friends, but I was always the only Jewish guy in the crowd, in the circle of friends. So as we would discuss things, a friend of mine who actually became born again, we had been involved in some not so wonderful things. One thing led to another. I got shot in the leg. It was just a whole weird time. A couple of our friends got shot and didn't make it. And so it was just a weird time. And so one of my friends decided he's going to religion. And through our conversations, he started to, shift the goal of the conversation from just being informative to trying to get me to see things from his perspective. And at the time I was frustrated with him about it, 18, 19 years old. But now I realize from his perspective, he was trying to save me, like how could I be upset with him for, for caring about me so much, so, the conversations would get, elevated and heated, and they would get passionate. We always had the understanding that we would, respect one another, perspectives, but we definitely would kind of go back and forth on certain things. And I didn't have all the answers that he asked, but I had several. And one in particular that I didn't have was, he asked me, why don't Jews, why don't the Jewish people celebrate Sabbath? Why don't they keep kosher? These kind of things that he says that he sees clearly in the Torah. And says, what's our excuse for no longer doing them? He has his reasons. So he was trying to bait me into saying, there is no excuse. And so he could say, well, I've got an excuse for you not to have to do it. So I didn't have an answer. I said, the truth is, I know that there are Jews that do. There are Jews that do Shabbos and they do kosher and all of these things. I just come from a family, a line of people that don't. I wasn't taught it. My mother didn't do it. And I imagined there was some great debate that took place hundreds or maybe thousands of years ago. And this rabbi said this way and the other rabbi said that way. And I just come from people from that school of thought. So I went searching for that answer. It wasn't a big meaning of life question. It wasn't some catalyst and something that happened. I wanted to know a very just basic answer. I just wanted an answer for this question because I didn't know it. He stumped me on this question. So I said, I don't know. It's just, I think certain people do and some people don't. And you do it according to how you were raised, So he said, so you believe in God? Check. You believe that God came down to Mount Sinai and gave Moses the Torah? Check. So you believe that the Torah is from God, no, not inspired, but you believe that it's God's will. I said, right. He said, and so you think that at some point somebody said you don't have to do it. I was like, I really don't know. I told him I don't know. He said, it sounds like maybe you should ask somebody. You should find out, because if indeed God said he wants you to do all of these things and you're not, if it were me, I would want to know why I don't have to or who told me not to. So it was a good point. It was a good question. So I asked a local, I'll say, I won't say who, but whoever is a rabbi, local rabbi in town at one of the Reform synagogues. Very nice guy, and I had known him for a really long time. And so I felt comfortable asking him this question. And he told me the truth. He said, that a few hundred years ago, it had already been happening for maybe the past 1,000 years, that if people in the Jewish communities in the Shtetl wanted to, in Europe at least, not so much in Spain and in the Middle East, but in Eastern Europe and in the Ashkenazi communities, if you wanted to live with the people of the culture around, the surrounding culture, if you wanted to live, and assimilate into their culture, you had to convert. You had to leave Judaism, if there was such a thing. But this is what they did. So a movement came along with another option. You can be Jewish at home and be German in the street or Russian in the street or what have you. So this was the reason for the Reform movement came around. And this was the point that people decided, if I want to go into this field of business or that field of business, then I will, not be so observant in public. And then it became, then coming to America and different things like that it became even less and less with people who came from, observant backgrounds. So I didn't know any of this. And I felt for me, that it seemed like there was still a break in the understanding here, because my family had been in America for 100 years already, something like that. So I was, so why then here did they make that? Did some families make that decision where it wasn't so necessary? And maybe it was in the beginning. I found out later that it was still difficult to be observant in America towards the earlier years of the migration of particularly Ashkenazi Jews, after the pogroms in the Ukraine and even later, I imagine after World War II, it was still not so easy finding work and things like that. But essentially, I still wanted to know, how come some people are able to do the mitzvahs and some of us were just taught don't do them? So I didn't know. So I asked him, I said, to me, I just don't understand, if it says in the Torah not to break Shabbos, but I was expected to have my mother drive me here on Saturdays to hear you read from this text from God saying not to drive on Saturday. So for me, it was like a logic thing. I wanted to understand the reasoning, the rationale behind it. So he said, this is just the story, this is the history. And so if your family, holds by this particular way, then that's just what's, how it works. And he was very respectful. He wasn't, there was no disrespect towards people who are observant. And so I had a really nice conversation with him, But I wasn't satisfied with the answer for myself, at least. So I called my father, my non-Jewish, my non-Jewish father. So in the 70s, it was really common and popular amongst the Black community to get into spirituality, right? Like New Age spirituality. It was a big wave in the 70s and the 80s, in particular, for everybody, but it didn't miss the Black community either. And so when as a kid, we had a lot of books in the house. Both of my parents are educated. My mother's an educator. So we had a lot of books and different topics and music and different things. But we had books on Judaism, and my father's books on Judaism were Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam's Guide to the Perplexed in English, which is a very deep book about a lot of Jewish philosophy and things like that. And he had the Zohar, and he had books on Chassidus from the Baal Shem Tov, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he had different things like that in the house. So, but he always told me as a kid, I wanted to read them. They looked so interesting, and he was always reading them at a certain point in my life. And I remember I asked him, what they were, if he would teach me, and he said that I can't learn them until I'm 40. So of course, as a kid, that made me want to learn it even more. Obviously, tell me I can't do something. Now I really want it. So anyway, so I called him, and I just was having a conversation with him about it, and I went and had this, these questions, and I went and asked him, and so he told me, he said, nice guy, that's great. He was like, I think if you want to get more information, you should check out the Chabad Lubavitch. And I remember because he always used both words. He never says Chabad or Lubavitch. It's always Chabad Lubavitch. So he says you should go talk to the Chabad Lubavitch guys. That rabbi, he's the real deal. He said he'll know the answer to that piece of your issue, your question. So I called Rabbi Shem Tov that night, and he told me. So I said, yeah, I'm a local kid. I got some questions, and I was just wondering if I could sit with you and have a conversation about some things. So he said, yes, of course. He said, meet me tomorrow at shul at 6:30. Right. So solidifying his minyan, his count for the minyan in the morning. And I was, happy to oblige. I didn't know that was the finesse that was taking place, but it worked out beautifully. And so I showed up in the morning. I knew enough to, at least dress kind of nice, but, I probably still had on a gold chain, and I was wearing the natural. So my hair was a little, out, and probably not wearing a yarmulke, obviously. And so I walk in, and at the time there was a yeshiva in Tucson. It was a high school age yeshiva, Chabad yeshiva. And I walked in, and it was just fortunate for me that I walked in at this time of Tucson history, where there was this yeshiva. I walk in, and there's suits and hats everywhere. It's a very just Jewish, visuals and imagery. As soon as I walk in, there's a very, there's Sephardim, by the side wall, and and everything. Rabbi Shem Tov sitting at the front. And so as soon as I walk in, I'm a little intimidated, but I keep going. I was a little nervous, and just a quick little side thing. When I was younger, I had a great time in synagogue. I was often asked outside of synagogue if I ever mentioned that I was Jewish to somebody who I saw was Jewish, not observant or anything, but someone would start, Magen David necklace or a chai. I would say, oh, hey, I'm Jewish too. I was always doubted. Maybe not always, that's a stretch, but often I was, doubted, and I've never met a Jew that looks like you, or I've never, yada yada, and often I was asked to like say a bracha or say Shema or say something to like prove that I'm Jewish, and so if this was by people who are not living in the Orthodox bubble, as is the critique and the criticism of most Orthodox communities. If that was happening by people who lived in secular world, how much more so is going to happen when I walk into this place and I see all these hats and jackets? So for a second, I got a little nervous. And Rabbi Shem Tov's son, Yankee Shem Tov, jumps off the back seat, the back chair, runs over to me, and before even asking me my name, he says, you want to put on tefillin? That was the first thing he asked me, if I wanted to put on tefillin. And I had never even seen tefillin before, never. And so I said, I grew up Reform. I don't, and I was just kind of confused. I didn't really know what to say. I didn't expect that he would push it. He was like, you're Jewish, I'm Jewish. I got tefillin, you can put on tefillin, right? He acted equally confused, and he had a good point. I'm Jewish too, I can put on tefillin, great. So I put the tefillin on, and he asked me if I knew Shema. So Shema, thank God, it was one of the things that I knew well. I'd known a lot. I trained for the Bar Mitzvah. I knew Ki Savo forward and backward and the Haftarah and the whole thing, but that was really the extent of my studying, and it was very focused. It was like learning an aria or learning a piece of music. It was for those purposes. So the prayers, though, Shema, I had Shema and Ve'ahavta. That was it. I was in there. I felt good. So I say Shema, and as I'm saying Shema, when I get to the part that mentions the tefillin, he points to the words and points to my arm. He says, that's what this is. And so the reason why Rabbi Shem Tov didn't answer my question was because I got my answer. My question was, why did some Jews get to have a part in the Torah and mitzvahs and getting to do all of these things? And then why did some of us, we didn't get to? And I realized that it's not because of I didn't get to, or I'm not, it's not part of my merit. I didn't merit to do it. It says, I'm Jewish, of course. Torah, mitzvahs, everything. There's no question what you did before, what your life was, who your, parents were, your upbringing. If you're Jewish, you're Jewish. And so I never even sat down with Rabbi Shem Tov to ask him the question. That was why I never got the answer from him. I got it. I got it from action. And so every day, every morning, even though I live 30, 35 minutes away, I drove every morning, putting on tefillin. I found out you do it every day. Man, I'll see y'all tomorrow. And eventually got my own pair of tefillin, and I ran off to yeshiva. And then, the cut too, I was in yeshiva for several years, and then I was actually visiting my mom before she was getting married, and the music director at the university reached out to her because she was the head of the piano department at the community college, asking her if she knew of any cellists. So I used to play cello in high school, like all the way through high school. I stopped when I went off to yeshiva. So she said, why don't you try it? Why don't you audition, see if you can get in? I hadn't played in years. I thought there's no way, but I was kind of excited by the challenge. I had 2 weeks before the audition, and I was expecting to go back to yeshiva, but I got in. And they said, if you're here and you want to stay, we'll push you in. So I got in. So while I was getting my degree, I met my wife and in Tucson, and we, and so it worked out for me with smicha, with ordination, that when I was in yeshiva, you don't take the time necessarily while you're in yeshiva learning ordination, especially for people who didn't have the extensive background, because we're trying to play catch up to get to the point where we are ready to learn for the content for ordination. And so I started the first topic before I left yeshiva, and I hadn't really planned how I was going to get back and finish. And then especially I met my wife. Unless I go to Kollel, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And then Rabbi Shem Tov in Tucson, Arizona, a relative of his, has this thing called the online school. So for Chabad kids, they can get their studies and their Chabad education through this platform. And so Rabbi Nachman Wilhelm out of Minnesota had an idea to start a ordination program using this platform. And so I got married, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that everybody, every husband, there should be a rabbi in the house. So he wanted everybody to have ordination. You don't have to, run to a rabbi every 10 minutes. Truth is, I do anyways. But still, it was nice that I had the opportunity. And it took a year to accomplish, and I finished the test right before my first child was born. And so it was perfect time where I, wasn't too busy with babies yet, and so that's how I ended up there. And so now, several years, because we have children now, we moved to Los Angeles for schools. This is before the big influx and the growth that's happening in Phoenix. Thank God. But yeah, so we're in LA and involved in the community, and we also started an online community for Black Orthodox Jews called Kamocha, and that was always something I wasn't necessarily interested in doing. I never really thought that I would be the person to do it, but as people asked me to do certain things, I just started doing those certain things, and before I knew it, I'm a co-founder of this organization. So yeah, so it's been busy and beautiful, and I'm just forever grateful to the Lubavitcher Rebbe wanting to send shluchim out to the desert of Arizona, and for those shluchim bringing on other shluchim to go to the even further recesses of the desert. And yeah, so that's the short of it. I figured to leave enough room for questions and discussion. And
Thank you. I'm going to start off with a quick question for you. The organization Kamocha, which you now direct, if I can use that, co-founder, co-direct.
Sure, yeah.
What do you find is the greatest challenge to the people that do end up gravitating towards your organization?
What's their challenge that brings them to the organization?
And I guess that's for, and I guess to broaden in general for Black Jewish. I know it's specifically the title says Orthodox, but I don't know if it's only. Do you find that there are others as well, or it's more the Black Orthodox?
It's a great question. It's a good point. So because there's two of us. One guy is a white eunuch, so he graduated from Yeshiva University. He's a rabbi, Rabbi Isaiah Rothstein, and then the other two involved are two women. One of whom is Lubavitch, the other is Sephardi, but they used to live in Crown Heights. So it's very, they're all very either intimate with Chabad or Chabad themselves, that I ended up, just because the other rabbi, so the Federations of North America are our fiscal sponsor. And so the other rabbi works for them. And so he's sort of a little hands off in terms of things with Kamocha. And so I really am able to operate sort of the way that I like to, and we kind of have good understandings, and everything. We always discuss things, but I operate things based on what I'm familiar with, which is the Chabad model. So while on the one hand there's a need to sort of legitimize Black people in rabbinical spaces, in Orthodox space, because there's so many Black Orthodox Jews, that the other organizations that exist were very just kind of for anybody, which is good, but there were challenges. If you have a Shabbaton that's on Zoom, that's challenging. If it's not kosher, that's challenging. So a lot of Black Orthodox Jews aren't so involved in those other organizations. And so to go even further, a lot of, unfortunately, there's been a handful of Black Orthodox Jews who grew up Orthodox or became Orthodox who leave Judaism because they don't feel like they have community. They feel a lack of community. And so in terms of the people who are already holding in that space, we want to keep them engaged. But then, the Chabad in me wanted it to be like all outreach, because I know there are so many Black Jews that are not Orthodox that are Jewish according to halacha, and I have a friend who is not, he's secular, entirely secular, and he went to Israel. He tried to go and sit in yeshiva, and simply put, he said, I like learning with people who look like me. I'd like to learn with someone who looks like me. So to me, it wasn't so important, but who's to say it's not important for somebody else who matters? So I kind of turned it into it's twofold. It's like it's a Chabad house and a Lubavitcher shul. It's like if you're in the fold, it's a great space. And if you're not yet, it's welcoming. And, we have classes on different levels. I do a Chumash Rashi for guys that want to, really go into it. We have a halakha discussion. where we really kind of we'll tackle a topic like something that's relevant to the Black community, like whether or not dreadlocks are kosher, for example, and how that
Are
pertains with
they?
the mikveh to machlekes.
Like all Jewish
Two-
things, it's a debate. Got it. I
exactly.
love it.
Two Jews, three opinions. So yeah, so it's come up several times, and so we have these kind of discussions. And then I also have a weekly thing where I chazer a sicha, for people who are maybe not holding at a higher level and they just want to sit in the class and get information, and so and inspiration. So so it's on all these levels, so which is great.
No, thank you. And and I know that for those of you who actually want to tune in on some of those classes, I know that a lot of them are broadcast on Facebook, right? If I've
They
seen
get
it.
posted. Yeah, we haven't gone live on Facebook. Maybe we'll do
Oh,
that.
so I don't know. I've seen recordings on your.
Yeah, they get posted.
So here's a question that came up privately to me. I
Okay.
have always preferred the spiritual music of African Americans. Is there any central point for the two genres?
It's so funny that because I just had this thought yesterday. So
And again, by the way, this is a good question for him because he's also musically in tune. I'm saying.
Yeah, and I'll say that my middle name Mel's. I'm named after my great grandfather, my great grandfather, Reverend Herbert Franklin Mel's, who was a famous. He's like a gospel writer. He wrote gospel music. He's the first African American to get a PhD in writing music. He was a professor at TSU, Tennessee State University. So I grew up, familiar with this genre of music, and it is beautiful. I could honestly I could do a whole hour of just talking about this topic. And I yesterday was thinking about it because I have a conversation with a friend he's Black, and he grew up in a Black Jewish community, where they're not all halakhically Jewish, but they hold that they are. And so they have Shabbos on Saturday. They wear kippahs and talesim. They read from Sefer Torah. They daven from Ashkenaz Nusach and some Sephardic. So it's Judaism, and they play gospel music, gospel style, but they do Jewish songs, the Jewish prayers, and they rewrite them. They write their own melodies and their own arrangements, and it's awesome. It sounds great. And so he says, listen, Jewish music is great, but we have the best Jewish music in my synagogue. And so, and he's halakhically Jewish, this particular kid. And I was thinking, I understand there's like a lot of soul, there's so much soul. Then I was in the car, and I had this niggin stuck in my head since Shabbos, and I was like, he must have never heard this niggin.
Niggin, by the way, for those of you, is it means a song, but it's like a soul-stirring Hasidic melody.
Yeah, many have without words, even a lot of them, and it's the words can be limiting in some way. So when it's just this melody, it means what it means, and you're able to really connect to it on such a deep level. And I just was literally in the car yesterday singing it on my way to Irvine for an upsherin, with a Black Orthodox Jewish family. Mazel tov to his son Zidan and his upsherin. And essentially on my way, I was singing this niggin and this song, and I was thinking about what he said. He said that I've never heard a Jewish song that comes close to the type of music we have. And I love the music they do, but it's about soul. The reason gospel music is so so lively, and it's so heartsick, it's so emotive and emotional, is because it's from a people who've been through some things, and there's a soul behind it. There's soul that goes into the music. The Alter Rebbe says that music is the pen of the soul, the first Chabad Rebbe says. And so, obviously by the Jewish people, we've been through a thing or two. And so, our music is also soulful just off of that reason alone, let alone where the music is coming from and what it's being inspired by,
So connection or no?
In the soul level, there is somewhat, lahavdil. It's not exact. It's not. Yes, yes and no. Different levels, but they both come from the soul. And that's why, I think there's a bit of a connection in that they're both very soulful genres.
I like that. Any other questions specifically? You can unmute your mic, or you can, if you're less comfortable saying it in public, definitely you can private message me as well, like our previous question. But questions on upbringing, question on challenges. Like I have a lot of questions for Jonathan that I've asked him when we chatted this past week, and more questions. Stan and Betty, I see you unmuted. You had a question?
I was just curious. I mean, when I look at you, when I heard what your subject matter was, when I looked at you, I thought you were white. I mean, that's just, because you're I'm now we're in New York, so I don't know what the TV is, the computer is doing. But I mean, looking at you, if you came into the house and you said you were white, I wouldn't question it. So I was wondering if you have any problem when you're dealing with somebody who's Black, who looks at you and says, he's not really Black.
So it's funny. That's a good point. So I generally don't make it a habit to announce when I walk in, whether I'm white or not. But yeah, my complexion is very light. I'm very light complected. And so around, especially the beard, the look kind of contributes to it. But no, interestingly enough, Black people seem to always be able to tell.
I was, because I mean, when you're saying you're working with, bringing Black people more into the community, and sure. I was saying, if I walked in and I saw you as a white person or as a Black person, I'd say, what is he doing?
Yeah, no, thank God I haven't had that issue with that demographic. So
then you should ask the question in reverse then, because he said the Black community realizes it immediately. You should ask the question in reverse. When you're in, let's say, a not colored room, if you want to call it that, do you see that white Jewish people will not identify with you or think you're Black, or they see you as white and therefore, I'm going to use the trust word because I think that's an honest word, less trusting or more trusting? Do you find it the reverse?
So no, I'm for sure able to navigate in Jewish spaces completely undetected.
I like how you say that.
Unless when it comes, we'll start conversing, we start talking, people, maybe I can see them like kind of looking, trying to figure out what I am or who I am. But, the Jewish geography, it's like right out the gate. It's, oh, where are you from? Oh, who do you know? Are you this and that? Oh, Perry, are you related to Rabbi Perry? Probably not. Out of Los Angeles, I don't think I am. Yeah. So it goes so far before it either comes up in conversation. I don't mind it. So there's I think the fact that I grew up, that I'm, born to an Ashkenazi mother, it's been pointed out to me that I don't mind having the conversation about my race because I have that piece of me that I will always feel comfortable. Whereas some people who either converted or both of their parents are Black and they get questioned, they're less comfortable talking about it sometimes because they think that that's the reason for the topic or for the discussion. Whereas for me, I don't have that.
What about your wife?
No, she sometimes gets uncomfortable when, if people look and ask, oh, where are you from, this and that, and, then it's obvious, everybody has this topic conversation. Hi, welcome home.
It's all right, everyone likes kids here. Don't worry about it.
Yes, who's home?
I thought it was interesting after President Biden's speech, the response from Senator Tim Scott, the only Black senator in the Congress. And he ended up his response with the rabbinical blessings, the 3 rabbinical blessings.
Priestly blessings.
Priestly blessings, you're right. Correct me, you're right. The 3 priestly blessings, and that's how he ended his response. And I'm going, where did that come from?
But he said he's very religious.
He's very religious, and I thought that was very,
I didn't watch the whole thing. I saw the highlights, but apparently that wasn't considered a highlight.
That's okay.
Yeah, I missed that. That's the biggest highlight, and I missed that.
Yeah.
Nobody
the other
shared
thing is,
that.
I think it's interesting that there are a lot of Black people who have taken rabbinic names. Like there's a New Testament professor from Wheaton College. His name is Esau.
Oh,
That's his
okay.
first name. I think it's so really unbelievable.
Biblical names. But
Names.
that's because if you're very biblical in nature and studious, I think you're going to want to emulate that in your children.
Right.
An interesting choice of all the
Yeah,
biblical
Esau
names.
for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Not Elijah.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
Any
yeah, he would have
other
had to
questions?
search to
Ethel, did
find
you
the
have a
worst
question?
options.
Yes, is your wife, was your wife from or religious when you met her, or?
Oh, no, so that's also why he was asking, because my wife is also biracial. And so when he was asking if my wife feels uncomfortable, so she's also biracial, and no, not religious when we met. In getting there, we met at a Shabbos table. So she wasn't, I think holding at where she's holding, or I wasn't holding where I'm holding now, I guess entirely. But we met at a Shabbos table. She
The
was
best place to meet.
on the way. Yeah. Met at a Shabbos table, and then later Rabbi Shem Tov tried to set us up.
Michelle Obama's cousin, I think, was head of a Black Jewish a synagogue, I guess, in Chicago. That's what I had heard. I don't know.
I heard, yeah.
Yeah.
Fournier. Yeah. I'm not so familiar with the place, but I've heard that, and I've heard his name. Yeah. Fournier.
Any other questions? Maybe something that we didn't touch. So again, if you're comfortable unmuting or you want to share something, please don't be shy. I want to make sure that you have the opportunity before he goes back to work. Okay, I see Beverly or Alan Nathan. I don't see a picture, so I don't know. It's probably Alan. Did you have a question?
Yes.
There you go.
Are you a congregational rabbi?
No, I'm not. I help out there, and I do whatever I can in the whatever community I'm in. But no, my ordination was the Lubavitcher Rebbe wanted pretty much everyone in Lubavitch to have ordination. So trying to follow orders. The easier ones to follow, I have to grab those.
But Alan, I think to add to his answer to you, because I like using this term a lot. He's a rabbi without borders, because if you think about what he's doing with Kamocha, which is this organization that he was referring to, is really saying you don't need to be part of a synagogue to have this community. And then when you integrate in your synagogue, maybe you won't feel as integrated. I think that's what you were mentioning, Jonathan. But here you have your space, and we're going to always be that community. That's real. So you really are you're a rabbi without borders.
I like that.
The
I'm gonna
beautiful
borrow that if you don't
internet.
mind.
That's what the internet can do to people, which is amazing.
Yeah, no, thank God.
I'm curious, actually, going back to your point of Kamocha, how far, where are you finding people joining from? Is it East Coast, West Coast? Is it only America, or are you finding Europe, Israel? Like, who's joining?
So big group from Eretz Israel, from
Wow.
Israel, and then for more of the internal, more like Orthodox, like more kind of already there, a little bit more learned, that crowd, and then all over New York, California, for everybody in between, or everybody else other than that, but even also in the observant, already observant crowd, definitely Los Angeles and New York.
So what's your word of advice to I'm saying to all of us, but I'm really asking for myself, in regards to making our communities more welcoming, opening? And I really like what you said about the not judgment, because for those of you who turned me on to this around Rosh Hashanah time, there's an Asian, I think it's a Reform rabbi in Manhattan, who penned an article about Chabad, actually, that made her cry, she wrote, because she remembers a time, people said, if you're Asian, you can't be Jewish, right? It just doesn't go. So she walked out of a subway, and a Chabad boy asked her if she wants candles to light Shabbat candles. And she was so taken aback, because her previous encounter with Chabad was like, we don't know if you're Jewish. And here it was like a given, would you like candles to light Shabbat candles? They didn't know if she's Jewish or not. They didn't know that she's a rabbi of this huge congregation in Manhattan.
Huge, yeah.
So she is, if you've seen her, she was, so I guess really for us, it's not necessarily in rabbinic spaces, but for all of us who I think we have a natural tendency to judge. It's just the way we were created, to lose that. And what's kind of that word of advice?
So I think in general, it's your father, maybe the first and only person that needs to have a discussion with somebody regarding their status. By most chances, there's not really a need to inquire somebody about, whether they're Jewish or how they're Jewish. I have a friend of mine who's also ordained, and he's Black. He grew up in Crown Heights, and he wrote a book, and the title is "I'm Fine, Thank You. How are you, Jewish?" Which I just loved. I thought it was such a genius title.
Who
That's the
wrote that?
title.
I gotta read that. Where do I find that?
His name is Chase Rishon. In fact, his pen name is Manishtana. So,
I've seen his name.
He
Adam
has
has
a good
showed me
sense of humor.
he does. He's a character, a bit controversial at times, but we don't always agree. But we did Malava Malka together last week when he was here. Like, we're friends, we just not on Facebook, So we don't agree on everything. But he's very funny, he's very nice. But that's one of those things that it's not always it doesn't always feel welcoming, even though it probably comes from a good place. In fact, there's somebody that I'm friends with now from Phoenix who's Black and Lubavitch. And when I met him in person many years ago when I was living in Arizona, I didn't approach him. And the reason I didn't approach him is because I've approached some Black Jews and they had no interest in talking to me because they're already having trouble fitting in. There's like, you're just going to make it harder for me. Like, you go that way, I'll go this way. And that really comes from, it is. And it was interesting to me. And some people criticize, some Black Jews criticize that reaction, but I see it as a reaction that's coming from, hurt. They're hurt and they're trying to navigate and trying to fly under the radar as it is. And they don't want, so were they already feeling more comfortable, they'd have no problem, talking to me or connecting with me. So there's definitely that. So inclusiveness, just making people feel, if you're curious about their story, even then there's ways to get to it, invite them over for Shabbos, have these kind of, making people feel like they're as much a part of the community as everybody else. That's really all that matters. It's really all that matters. Yeah.
Thank you. I saw that.
Do you still, what do you do? First of all, I'd like to know, what do you do for a living?
So my wife and I have a payroll company, and I do hashgacha. I do kosher certifying for the OK. So I work at a restaurant here. I go to other restaurants. I do events.
You're not doing anything in music.
I'm not.
Music. No.
No.
That you got to talk to his mom about. She's just got to put a little bit more pressure.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes back as you get older.
He didn't say he forgot it. He didn't say he forgot it.
Still hoping.
There you go.
Still hoping, she says. No, she's not.
I just wanted to say that when Jonathan was born, my mother was only so worried that he should not know he was Jewish. And I grew up in a Reform home and I raised him Reform, and she never lived long enough to see this transformation in Jonathan. And we often sometimes joke that, my mother was so afraid that he wouldn't know he was Jewish. And now look at, he's more observant than any of us ever were. And I'm sure she'd be very proud, but maybe also surprised.
I'm sure she sees and she's guiding him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
She was an immigrant. So she came during the Russian Revolution, right after the revolution. And So that's, I imagine that was really tough for her to deal with my marriage after they had to basically escape, quickly from where they lived in Russia. So then after all that, for me to have married who I married, but I don't regret it, of course.
One of the similarities between the Black community and the Jewish community is a healthy trepidation around outsiders, and that comes from trauma, obviously, and it comes, so it's interesting that many major cities, you find these two communities always kind of on top of one another, and you have two people with a history of trauma and reasons to not be so trusting all the time, and so it's not so easy to navigate all the time.
Interesting.
I'm hearing a book and a movie.
First the book.
First the book.
Harvey, you publish?
I don't write even, so no.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to make one comment. When I was a little kid, I'm going back a lot of years, and the first Black Jew that I met there was somebody I was living in the Bronx, and there was a Black rabbi who came around collecting for his congregation. And it was in Harlem, and after he left, because I was like 7, 8 years old, they told me that he was Ethiopian. Now, I don't know if he was Ethiopian or not, but he was Black. And the comment was that there were Black Jews who were Ethiopian Jews, because that's where Haile Selassie came from and claimed that he was one of the 12 tribes. So, but that was the only thing. That was early on. Now, I belonged to a congregation, Orthodox congregation. There was a Black family in the congregation that I used to see for the high holidays.
Nice. Yeah, there was in New York during the turn of the 20th century, and just before it.
Well, I'm not that old.
No, but that's when they started. No, of course not. But that's when they kind of started in Harlem. I think there's Rabbi Matthews of the Commandment Keepers, and there's somebody else, and I'm sure it'll get discussed with the Cantor conversation, because they had a big community there. The thing was, when they identified as Jews in these black communities, they said they're reading the Torah. They see, the curses of slavery and all these things that sound shot for shot exactly the way, African American slavery happened, the transatlantic slave trade. And so to then try, joining synagogues saying we're Jews, and Jews saying, well, that's not quite how it works. There's a conversion process. Come and learn. Whether they were comforting or welcoming or not, I think Black people were at the time tired of what, non-Black people telling them what they are or are not, or can or cannot be.
They had to prove themselves. They had to
prove exactly. So some of them.
There's a group in Africa, supposedly there are Koyanim, someplace in South Africa, all the way in
the
South
Lemba
Africa.
tribe, yeah.
Yeah.
The Lemba tribe. They probably came from Yemenite Jews who traveled along the side there, yeah. But yeah, so it was easy for some of the Black, community leaders to say they were Ethiopian, because Ethiopian Jews, there was discussions on it, but not really. Yeah. They're accepted in the global Jewish world as Jews. So it was easier. Not to say that none of them were Ethiopian, but being realistic, the transatlantic slave trade didn't pull from Ethiopia.
Yeah.
It's mostly West Africa. So the likelihood of it was slim, but I'm sure it was possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Any last questions? I want to make sure you have your time as well today.
Do you have children?
Yes, he heard
Thank
it.
God.
Yeah, I heard them, but I want to know what.
Thank God. Three baby girls, 5, 3, and 2.
Terrific.
Thank God.
Terrific.
Are you aiming for a basketball or a baseball team?
He doesn't have to answer that one, right?
No.
All right. If there are no other questions, I am going to say thank you very much. It was
Thank
great
you.
learning
Good
from
job.
you,
Thank
listening to you, and
Thank you so much for having me. So nice to meet you all.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you.
Come back again.